Now that December is here, it's time to talk winter weather, and even though we've gotten a couple dustings of snowfall, that big snowstorm still has not yet happened this season. But even though we do see snow and ice in the winter rainfall is something that also is commonplace, especially early in the season during the month of December. So in this week's Climate Friday newsletter, we're going to talk about winter rainfall and how because there's warmer temperatures and more moisture, we are seeing more rain during the winter time. And when it rains, it often pours, as we saw this week with a heavy rainfall event. Rainfall in late autumn and early winter is commonplace. Now, before we talk about climate change, let's break down the impacts that the weather pattern has on how much rain and precipitation we see in the winter. You've probably heard these words before, but La Nina, something that will come into play a lot this winter. So obviously climate change does play a role, but there are certain weather factors that dictate how much precipitation we get during the winter time. La Nina essentially has to do with cooler than normal waters pooling in the tropical Pacific and this high pressure system way out west. What that does to our jet stream is it makes for a more active storm track. You can see that jet rolling right through the Great Lakes region. For those of you that live in Ohio and Michigan, that active storm track typically produces more storm systems. Now, when you think storm systems in the winter, you may think of big-time snowstorms and even blizzards, but that's not always the case. Sometimes with La Nina winters, what happens with this active storm track is we see rainfall or wintry mix. That's something that we saw last year and maybe a recurring theme this year. So what does the data show us about climate change and winter rainfall? In general, winters are getting wetter on normal and also warmer, and those two go hand in hand and are very closely related. Now, we've been very dry this month. That is until the weekend. Sunday was a rainy all-day washout of a day with 1.67 inches of rainfall. That was at Toledo Express Airport. Now, that makes it the rainiest single day that we've had in 2022 so far, and that brings our November total up to 2.05 inches. In other words, almost all of the rainfall the entire month happened on this one day. Now, that's a trend that's becoming more common due to climate change, these heavy rainfall events that can happen in the late autumn and winter, especially when it's a little bit too warm for snowfall. A few rainfall totals from Sunday showing you over 1.6 inches in Port Clinton. Fulton County takes the cake with close to 2 inches of rainfall. Areas just north and west of the Maumee River saw the heaviest rain. Defiance checking in at 1.66, and Findlay a little bit less, but still a significant rainfall event. Now, of course, the weather does always have those ups and downs and fluctuations, and moderate drought conditions over much of the Buckeye State as well as southeast Michigan did help that rainfall get absorbed a little more easily than it might. One of the analogies I've used often before in the Climate Friday newsletter is the equivalent of boiling water on the stovetop. Our temperatures under the realm of climate change are warmer. In other words, we have that stove cranked up to high. The water is going to boil a lot faster than if the stovetop is turned to low. When the winter weather is warmer, we get that stovetop turned up to high, and that causes more precipitation and more heavy rain during the winter. What we see is more moisture evaporates. That could be moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, from the Pacific, even from our own Great Lakes here at home, and we see heavier rainfall events that are more frequent and more intense. So how have temperatures changed? Well, we just wrapped up the month of November, and that is one month that is about 1.5 degrees warmer than it was just a decade ago. Now, because November is warmer, we do see more moisture for rainfall. However, because of that warmth, we see less early season snow. Now, December is one of the months that has been affected the most by climate change. And if you're watching this from YouTube or WTOL 11+, that calendar now flipped over to early November. In just the last decade alone, we've seen a 3-degree uptick in December temperatures, and that's caused some big changes in our weather here. Now, that's just in the last decade. Since 1970, those bright red colors across the eastern part of the United States show you a 4 to 5 degree increase in our temperatures, and of course, days above normal. In other words, how often do we see days above normal? We typically in the winter months see 15 more days than we did back in the 1970s. In other words, those above average days growing more commonplace. Since 1970, we've seen a 5-degree increase in winter warming, and if that sounds like a lot, it is. Now, 5 degrees can make a world of difference. Think about it this way. We could be below freezing at around 30 degrees, but with that 5-degree uptick, we'll be above freezing, and that can be the difference between rain, snow, or a wintry mix. Therefore, that winter warming plays a big role in how much precip we get as well. These green colors across Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, and much of the Great Lakes showing you wetter weather than normal during the winter months. Now, to be fair, climate change doesn't have the same impacts across the entire United States. The southeastern part of the United States, those orange and yellows, those colors indicate actually below normal rainfall. So while the Midwest and the Great Lakes is seeing an uptick in rainfall, folks who live in the Southeast, including Florida, Alabama, are actually seeing a little bit less rainfall. Also, the Pacific Northwest is one area that has seen a decline in rainfall. To recap some of the impacts we are seeing, rainfall during the winter months is growing more commonplace and also seeing heavier rainfall. And sometimes we do end up on the cooler side of things, and that does produce some big-time snowstorms. But as we saw last weekend, rainfall in November and December, it still happens, and it's more common than you might think. Now, with the warming temperatures, we are often on the rainier side of things, and of course, we're still going to get some big snowstorms, but a lot of the time, we're going to end up on the rainy side of the storm system, and that means more precipitation and not quite as much snow. Of course, as December unfolds, we'll inevitably get some good snowstorms, and as we move forward in the winter, some bursts of cold, but also some unseasonable warmth and rainfall. And whatever Mother Nature has in store, we'll keep you updated. Stay tuned to WTOL 11 and head to WTOL.com/email to subscribe to the Climate Friday newsletter. We'll see you next Friday.